everyone. They're seriously preparing for the war with the Russian Federation.
And around Greenland, there is an ongoing discussion. Greenland, we believe that if the Western countries want to, well, it would seem that the world order the West is happy with should be based on these rules, but clinging to them, I do not know what's going to happen after the Greenland drama.
That President Putin has received an invitation by President Trump to become a part of the Board of Peace.
Talking about other tracks of our interaction with the US, it also includes Ukraine, naturally, and we value that under Trump, the US became the only country that not only expressed the understanding and taking into account the interests of the Russian side, but also came up with the solutions. They took into account the root causes of the current crisis. We welcome such an approach, and we believe that it is completely justified in Alaska, in Anchorage, on the 15th of August last year, and President Putin has repeatedly stated it publicly. We welcomed the proposals that were submitted by Washington prior to the meeting in Alaska, and we do hope up until now that this understanding is still in place.
Our position on the Ukraine, to put it in a nutshell, is that there is a need to eliminate the primary causes of that crisis, the primary root causes that the West has been creating for many years in order to turn Ukraine into a security threat against our country, trying to create a stronghold against Russia right at our border, when the classic use of the international law as the foundation for multilateral relations was substituted by something that is commonly known as a unipolar world, when the United States were leading the Western Bloc, including NATO, essentially decided that the end of history has come, as was declared by Francis Fukuyama in his famous book. They were thinking that no one would stand in the way of Western dominations with all of its theories, liberal, non-liberal, conservative, and so on. So the West was dominating in the world sphere, according to them. When President Putin came to power in the Russian Federation as the outcome of the election in 2000, the situation started to change. Rather, the situation was shifting towards the revision of this very unambiguous Western approach to the world order. And Russia, in the odds with President Putin, started to become aware of its place in the world arena. It started to bring back its identity and started to restore it with the full respect of its 1,000 years of history, traditions, principles, friends. If you read up on the statements by the European politicians, leaders, and Kallas and Ursula von der Leyen, Macron, Starman, Rutte, everyone, they're seriously preparing for the war with the Russian Federation. They're not hiding that fact.
And around Greenland, there is an ongoing discussion. And one could have hardly imagined anything like that some time ago. Right now, there are talks about the prospects of keeping NATO as a single Western political and military bloc. Speaking about Greenland, we believe that if the Western countries want to deal this way with Greenland, but as for us, in all our dealings with the global majority, with the global south, with everyone who is interested in talking to Russia, in talking about mutually beneficial projects, we'll speak with these countries based on such principles as equality. Well, it would seem that the world order the West is happy with should be based on these rules, but these rules have been basically struck out right now. It's the law of the strongest, and we are all witnessing that. And recently, both NATO and the EU and the OSCE have been employed in order to infiltrate into the regions that traditionally have been under our influence. I refer to the Caucasus, Central Asia, the Russian Far East. So without agreeing to an equal continental architecture, they wanted to manage everything from a Euro-Atlantic center. That was their purpose. And these ideas are very much alive and relevant, at least for them. And they are trying by any means trying to cling to them. I do not know what's going to happen after the Greenland drama, but this mindset has deep roots in the heads of the current European elites, most of them.
Let's not forget that the United States are conducting an active policy of weaponization of the outer space, of placing weapons in outer space. At the United Nations, we're trying to mobilize the global community in order to have a resolution on the first non-placement of weapons in outer space. The U.S. are trying to turn down that initiative, and they're asking us to support their initiative of non-placement of nuclear weapons in outer space. We agree to that, but however, the threat to the Earth is being created by the non-nuclear weapons that the U.S. is planning to place in outer space. And we suggest to adopt a resolution about non-placement of all weapons, but they agree only to the nuclear. That means that non-nuclear weapons will be, according to U.S. plans, will be stationed there. I have already said in my introductory remarks, and Dmitry Peskov confirmed that yesterday, that President Putin has received an invitation by President Trump to become a part of the Board of Peace. We have also received annex to that letter, rather lofty document called a charter of the Board of Peace that states that the board will be prepared to deal not only with the Gaza sector, I don't think it's even mentioned there, but it will be tasked with the resolution of conflicts around the world. And naturally, we'd like to clear up the conceptual vision and the practical vision of our American colleagues of this initiative. We're trying to clear these matters up. We'll keep in touch. What we're talking about is that there are members of NATO. And this alliance, right now, is being put to the test. What's its worth? We absolutely have no interest in interfering in anyone's affairs. If we talk about Greenland, well, that's part of the issue that has to do with the consequences of the colonial era. Starting with the 13th century, Greenland essentially was a Norwegian colony, starting with the 18th, the very beginning of the 20th century. It was the Denmark's colony.
And by the mid-20th century, an agreement was signed according to which it is part of Denmark, not as a colony, but as an associated territory. It was associated with the European Union, but in principle, Greenland is not a natural part of Denmark, is it? It was not a natural part of Norway or Denmark. It was the colonial acquired state. Well, people got used to that, and that's the other matter.
The national interests of such countries as the US and Russia will not always coincide. In most cases, they won't coincide at all. But should they coincide, whenever that happens, it would be a gross mistake not to take advantage of those coinciding positions to come to an agreement and implement mutually beneficial projects in economy and investment and finance and so on and so forth. And then he added, when the national interests of such countries as Russia and the US do not coincide, it would be a crime to let that lack of coinciding positions to degenerate into a confrontation, especially a hot confrontation. And in my response to him, I said that I fully share that philosophy, that logic, and I said that I do hope that I'm happy that the U.S. understands that such a position articulated by Marco Rubio is well-founded. Your luck, please ask your question.
Thank you very much, Matthew Chance from CNN. You've, Mr. Lavrov, repeatedly praised President Trump for understanding Russia's interests on the issue of Ukraine, for instance, but you've also criticized recent US moves against Russian allies in Venezuela, in Iran, threats against Cuba, things like that. My question is, to what extent do you think that inconsistency, that unpredictability, that willingness to use unconstrained power by President Trump actually in itself represents a threat to Russia?
Well, from the outset, I spoke about Cuba and Venezuela in my opening remarks, as well as about Iran, and we see the inconsistency in actions by the administration of Donald Trump in terms of ensuring international security and their attitude towards international law. When asked this question several days ago, Donald Trump said he was not interested in international law. All the norms in the international arena were set by his own morality, as he said. This is a very interesting statement. We have never counted or expected that with any country or our neighbors we would have absolutely coinciding position. These positions cannot coincide absolutely. These positions cannot coincide absolutely, nor can it be the case between the two biggest nuclear powers, the US and Russia. I think it's a very good chance right now to remember what New York Times has recently reported on. This newspaper prepared an article, it's called Godfather in Riyadh. It says that Marco Rubio, during his talks with myself and with my delegation in Riyadh in February 2025, as New York Times has said, has basically switched on the film lover mode, citing Godfather. He allegedly cited Corleone, saying that I've always tried to be not to be careless. Women and children can be careless, but men cannot be, and nuclear powers cannot be careless. This conversation did happen, and if Marco Rubio thought it possible to share that with the press, I think I can do the same.
Although we see that Europe and Zelensky with his team in a hysterical way try to confuse the US and try to make them change tack, try to impose their concepts, including primarily the 60-day truce or eternal truce. It is clear that the Ukrainian side is in a very bad situation on the battlefront line, and not only that, politicians in the corruption scandals have mired other processes, but allowing to rearm the Kiev regime once again and giving him a chance to have a respite and to attack once again the Russian Federation as a tool of frenzy Western Europeans. Well, we cannot allow ourselves to have this luxury.